I've never been much of a heavy drinker, but after my best friend's 21st birthday party, I was definitely in no condition to drive. I did the responsible thing and called an Uber. Looking back, I realize how much we literally gamble with our lives every time we hop into a stranger's car just because an app told us to. The driver pulled up in a silver sedan. He seemed totally normal, cheerful even. He introduced himself as Dave and started making small talk about the party. I was feeling that post-alcohol grogginess, so I was just leaning my head against the window, watching the city pass by.
But after about 10 minutes, I realized we weren't on the highway anymore. We were on a back road that was pitch black, heading away from the main residential area. I asked him if there was a wreck or something, and he just gave this casual, breezy laugh. "Shortcut," he said. "Saves us 5 minutes." I started overthinking it immediately. My gut was screaming that something was off. But Dave just kept chatting. Then, out of nowhere, the conversation took a weird turn.
He asked me if I lived alone, and then, in this almost fatherly tone, he asked, "Do you carry a gun or a knife? You know, for safety?" I laughed it off, feeling a bit awkward. I told him, "No, I don't really believe in that stuff. I've never felt like I needed one." The car went silent for a second. Literally, the air felt like it got colder. Then Dave whispered, "That's good. It's much safer to have one, but it's good you don't." My sobriety hit me like a ton of bricks. I looked at the child lock on the door and realized if I didn't get out right then, I might never get out. I told him I was feeling sick from the drinks and that I was literally about to throw up in his back seat. I begged him to pull over for just a second. He hesitated, but he eventually pulled onto the shoulder of this empty, wooded road. The second the car stopped, I didn't just pee, I bolted. I ran into the tree line, not looking back, and hid in a ditch for what felt like hours until I saw his taillights finally disappear. I felt like an idiot for weeks. I thought I was just being a paranoid drunk who ruined a nice guy's rating. But maybe 4 months later, I was sitting in my living room when a breaking news alert popped up.
A man had been arrested in connection to over 60 murders across the state. A former rideshare driver. When they showed his mugshot, I literally dropped my phone. It was Dave. Same slicked back hair, same cheerful eyes. I watched the live interview with him from the county jail.
The reporter asked him if he ever regretted any of the people he killed. He leaned into the microphone, gave that same breezy laugh I remembered from the car, and said, "I don't regret the ones I took. I only regret the very first one. The one who got out of the car to pee and never came back. He's the reason I got sloppy. I never liked losing. I don't take Ubers anymore, and if I do, I'm always carrying. Because you never know if your friendly driver is just checking to see if you're easy prey."
This story is a bit different because, for once, I wasn't the one calling for a ride. I was the one behind the wheel. I started driving for Uber maybe 3 years ago. I was working a dead-end retail job during the day, and I needed the extra cash to keep up with rent, so I started taking the late-night shifts. It was mostly fine, just a lot of college kids and people heading home from bars. You get used to the smell of cheap beer and the repetitive small talk. But after a while, you start to develop this weird hyper-awareness. You spend 8 hours a day looking at people through a rearview mirror, and you start to notice things that most people miss. You notice the way someone's eyes shift when they're lying about their destination. You notice the way their hands shake. This happened on a Tuesday night.
around 2 a.m. Tuesday nights are usually dead, which is why I liked them. It was quiet, peaceful, and the roads were empty. I was literally about to log off and head home when I got a ping for a pickup at a trailhead, about 15 minutes outside of town.
Now, overthinking is basically my hobby, and I was already questioning this. Who goes hiking at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday? But then I thought, maybe they're just stargazing, or maybe they had a fight with a partner and needed a walk. I decided to take it because the fare was actually pretty high. The drive out there was unsettling. The streetlights eventually just stopped, and I was relying entirely on my high beams. The woods on either side of the road felt like they were closing in on the car.
I finally pulled up to the GPS pin, which was just a small gravel turnout next to a dense patch of forest. There were no other cars around, just me. I sat there for a minute, the engine idling, feeling that familiar crawl of anxiety up my spine. I was literally seconds away from hitting cancel and flooring it out of there. Then, out of the darkness, a man appeared. He didn't come from the trail. He seemed to just step out from behind a large oak tree. He was wearing a heavy trench coat and a baseball cap pulled down low. He didn't have a bag, no flashlight, nothing. He just walked up to the rear passenger door and climbed in. "For Mark?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from cracking. The man didn't say anything. He just gave a slow, rigid nod. I started driving. The destination was an address about 40 miles away, a residential area I wasn't familiar with. The silence in the car was heavy. It wasn't a comfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that feels like it has a weight to it. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, but because of his hat, I couldn't see his eyes. He was just sitting there, perfectly still. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't looking out the window. He was just staring at the back of my headrest. About 10 minutes into the ride, I started overthinking the trench coat. It was a warm night, maybe 70 degrees, so there was literally no reason to be wearing something that heavy. I started imagining what could be hidden under there. Maybe a weapon? Maybe something worse? My mind was going to all these dark places. I tried to break the ice to see if he was just a normal, shy guy. I said something like, "Quiet night tonight, huh?" Nothing. He didn't even blink. At this point, I was genuinely scared. I felt like I was trapped in a cage with a predator. I reached down and subtly checked that my doors were locked, even though I knew he was already inside. I kept thinking, maybe he's just high? Or maybe he's having a mental health crisis? I tried to rationalize it to keep myself from panicking. Then we hit a red light near the edge of the city. It was the only light for miles. As we sat there, the man finally spoke. His voice was incredibly low, almost a whisper, but it sounded like he hadn't used his vocal cords in years. He said, "You have a nice family, Victor." I froze. My hands literally went numb on the steering wheel. My name on the app is Vic, but I never told him my full name. And more importantly, I don't have any photos of my family in my car. I don't have stickers on my bumper. There was absolutely no way this stranger could know anything about my personal life. I felt a surge of pure adrenaline. I didn't ask how he knew. I didn't say another word. The light turned green, but I didn't go the speed limit. I pushed the car as fast as it would go, heading toward a 24-hour gas station I knew was only a few miles ahead. I kept checking the mirror, and for the first time,
He was looking back. He was smiling. Not a normal smile, but a wide, toothy grin that didn't reach his eyes. When I pulled into the bright, fluorescent lights of the gas station, I slammed on the brakes. I didn't even park properly. I just turned to him and said, "Get out. Now." The man didn't move at first. He just sat there, looking at the gas station attendant through the window. Then he leaned forward, so close I could smell the metallic scent of his coat. He whispered, "You should check your trunk before you go home tonight." He opened the door, stepped out, and literally vanished into the shadows behind the station before I could even process what he said. I sat there for 5 minutes, just shaking. I was too terrified to get out of the car. I called the police right there from the driver's seat. When the officers arrived, they did a sweep of the area, but the man was gone. One of the officers asked me to pop the trunk. I was trembling so hard I could barely find the release lever. I was thinking the absolute worst. Maybe there was a body. Maybe he had hidden something illegal. The officer opened the trunk and shone his light inside. It was empty. Or I thought it was. But then he reached into the deep corner near the spare tire well and pulled something out. It was a small Polaroid photo. It was a picture of me. Not from that night, but from 3 days prior. I was standing in my driveway, unloading groceries.
The photo had been taken from the bushes across the street. On the back of the photo, written in black permanent marker, were 3 words: "See you soon." I didn't go home that night. I stayed at a friend's house and quit Uber the very next morning. The police never found the man, and they couldn't trace the Polaroid. I moved to a different apartment complex with gated security, but I still have this habit of checking my rearview mirror every 5 seconds when I'm driving. Maybe he was just a stalker playing a sick game. Or maybe he was something much more dangerous. But the fact that he was in my car, sitting inches away from me while I drove him exactly where he wanted to go, that's something that literally changes the way you look at every person you pass on the street. Being a driver means you're providing a service, but it also means you're an easy target. Because when you invite a stranger into your car, you're not just giving them a ride, you're giving them a seat in your life. And sometimes they don't want to leave.
There is a specific kind of numbness that takes over your brain when you get bad news in the middle of the night. It's like your mind literally shuts down all secondary functions just to focus on the one thing that matters. This happened about a year ago. I was living in Honolulu, working a job that kept me busy enough to ignore how much I missed my parents back in Oregon. Around 2 a.m., my phone started buzzing on my nightstand. It was my father. His voice sounded like it was coming from 1,000 miles away, thin and trembling. He told me my mother had been taken to the hospital, something with her heart, and that things weren't looking good. I spent the next 3 days in a state of total paralysis, trying to coordinate time off and find a flight that wouldn't cost me my entire savings. By the time I booked my ticket, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours in 3 days, and I was overthinking every possible what-if scenario. My flight was scheduled for the early morning, so I booked an Uber for midnight to give myself plenty of time to get to the airport. It was a Tuesday night, and it was pouring. In Hawaii, when it rains like that, the world feels like it's dissolving. I stood under my apartment awning, clutching my suitcase, watching the tiny car icon on my screen crawl toward me. When a dark, older model SUV pulled up, I didn't even look at the license plate. I just wanted to be in the car. I wanted to be on the plane. I wanted to be home. The driver was a man who looked to be in his late 50s.
He had this deep, gravelly voice that seemed to vibrate the plastic panels of the car. I sat in the back, leaning my head against the cold glass of the window, hoping he'd just let me sit in silence. But almost immediately, he started talking. "Heading home for the holidays?" he asked. I gave him the short version. I told him my mom was sick in Oregon and I was in a rush. I thought that would be a social cue for him to stop, but it had the opposite effect. He started telling me about his own family, but the way he talked about them, it literally didn't sound right. He told me he used to be in collection services, which I assumed meant debt. But then he started describing his work in a way that made my skin crawl. He said he liked the night shift because people are softer when they're tired. He told me about his wife, but he spoke about her in the past tense, then the present tense, then referred to her as the specimen. I was so exhausted that I kept wondering if I was just mishearing him. Maybe I'm just overthinking it, I told myself. Maybe it's just a weird local dialect, or he's just an eccentric guy. But then he started talking about his kids. He said he had 3 of them, and he was keeping them safe, in a place where they would never have to worry about the sun again. He looked at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and they didn't seem to blink. He asked me, "Do you think a body can survive on just salt and water for a month? I'm running a bit of an experiment." I felt a jolt of ice-cold adrenaline hit my chest. I looked at the GPS. We were supposed to be on the H1 freeway heading toward the airport, but we were on a winding side road near the industrial docks. I realized then that I hadn't been paying attention to the turns. I asked him, "Hey, why are we off the freeway? The airport is the other way." He didn't answer me directly. He just started humming a low, tuneless melody. Then he said, "The airport is just a gateway, but some people aren't meant to leave the island. Some people are meant to stay here, in the dark." My heart started racing so hard I could feel it in my throat. I knew I had to get out, but we were moving at 40 miles per hour down a deserted, rain-slicked road. I looked at my phone, but the signal was dropping in and out. I started to panic. I told him, "Look, I forgot my passport. I literally have to go back. Please, just pull over and let me out. I'll call another car." He slowed down, but he didn't stop. He started talking about how the transition is easier if you don't fight it. He was reaching for something in the center console, something wrapped in a heavy gray cloth. At that exact moment, we passed a small 7-Eleven that was still lit up. It was the only sign of life for miles. I didn't wait for him to stop. I grabbed my suitcase, unbuckled my belt, and screamed, "I'm going to be sick! Pull over now!" The second he tapped the brakes, I kicked the door open. I tumbled out onto the wet asphalt, skinning my palms, and I didn't even look back. I sprinted toward the bright lights of the convenience store, screaming for the clerk to lock the door. The SUV sat in the middle of the road for a long time. The driver didn't get out. He just sat there, the wipers flicking back and forth, watching me through the store's glass windows. After what felt like an eternity, he slowly drove away into the rain. I ended up calling the police, but because I hadn't checked the plate and used a guest booking through a third-party app my friend had set up, the trail went cold. I found the account, but it had been hacked from a burner phone. I eventually made it to Oregon. My mom pulled through, thank God. But I spent the entire flight staring at the back of the seat in front of me, thinking about that gray cloth on the center console. I realized that the reason I got away wasn't because I was fast. It was because he wanted me to feel the fear first. To this day, I can't take an Uber at night. Whenever I see a car's headlights in the rain, I literally start to shake. Because I know that somewhere on that island, there's a man who thinks the night makes people soft.
he's still out there, looking for his next experiment.